Right. Welcome, Duke. Wonderful to speak with you today. This is a conversation I've been looking forward to for some time. Before we dive into the conversation, though, I want to first acknowledge that today I'm speaking from unceded and unsurrendered Algonquin Anishinaabe territory in what is colonially known as Ottawa. As a settler to this land and a first-generation immigrant, my parents moved originally from India when I was about 9 years old. Territorial acknowledgement is really important for me to locate myself and be present to the privileges I have as a first generation settler. Canada Helps has a rich history of sharing, of innovation, of impact. It's been a highly responsive organization, especially through the last few years of the COVID-19 pandemic. But more broadly speaking, throughout the shifts and the transformations in the wider societal landscape of giving, it's been really inspiring to watch and observe from a distance. So I'm really keen to dive into some of what you see as where the giving landscape is headed. Would love to hear about your dreams for Canada Helps and the next evolution of Canada Helps. And really curious about some of the tensions that you see as well emerging in the nonprofit charitable landscape and the giving landscape, and how those could affect some of the shifts that you might see the next 5 to 7 years. So shall we drive in?
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on the program. Looking forward to the conversation.
Okay, thanks. Thanks so much. Let's begin with your journey. So I think this is something that folks will be really curious about, and we've had a couple of chats about your journey, and it's really intriguing. So, what's your story and journey, and why and how did you come to enter the world of social purpose?
Yeah, it's not a very untypical journey. I think I only really recently realized that this is actually what my endpoint was meant to be, without knowing all that at the beginning. So I had a pretty typical career in the corporate world, in both financial services and technology, and the intersection of those two things, doing a lot of interesting things, but in roles that were typical, and many people do in technology and in product management and marketing and other things. And over the course of my career, I would say in the last decade plus, social goods started intersecting with my career. I'd always had that as part of my personal life, whether it was through charitable giving or through volunteerism, but it started intersecting into my career opportunities at various companies, whether that was through formalized volunteer programs in the workplace, or through working through charitable organizations within my organizations, or through promoting social good initiatives like neurodiversity in the workplace. And I started thinking about, well, this is really something that I actually enjoy as part of my work life. How can I make that more a part of it? And then when the opportunity at Canada Helps came along, it was sort of ideal, because it took everything that I had done in the fintech world and said, okay, now how do you apply that to social good? And now looking back at my career, I can sort of say, well, all those were little building blocks to get me to this point, which is now my purpose and the thing that I'm going to do that's going to have a lasting memory. And I couldn't be happier with the organization that I joined to do this. Canada Helps, as you mentioned at the beginning, has a rich history within Canada, over 20 years now, of really being a core part of the sector infrastructure of charitable giving, and being an important capability that we provide, particularly to smaller charities in Canada, that they couldn't do themselves in the digital realm.
Right. And having spent much of your career in the corporate world, how would you describe the learning curve here? Because it's quite a shift, quite a jump. I mean, the finance bit makes sense, the technology bit makes sense. I think I sort of see that there's a lot of transferability there, but the sort of from a professional charitable sector experience perspective, I'm really curious about what the learning curve was like.
Yeah. Yeah. So we always talk about the first 90 days in a new role, right? And my first 90 days were really about listening and learning, both internally in the organization to understand the operations here at Canada Helps and all the different things that we do for donors and for charities, but also externally in understanding the landscape within Canada of the charitable sector,
Mhm.
meeting with different sector leaders and thought and influencers and regulators, and really thinking about how they all work together. You know, when I joined, everybody kept talking about the sector, the charitable sector, as if it was this monolithic thing, right? And as I got into it in my first 90 days, what I really quickly realized is it's not. It's not one thing. It's many, many different things and many different organizations, all with the same North Star, but approaching it in very different ways. So learning what all the different organizations do, whether it's the, you know, the feet on the street organization, charitable organizations, or umbrella organizations, or advocacy organizations, is really understanding that landscape was part of the learning curve, and then thinking about how we can best contribute value to that ecosystem.
Right. And are there a couple of things I'm really curious about, and there's probably lots of things that you heard from sector leaders, but what are a couple of things that really stood out for you as like, huh, didn't know about that?
Yeah, there was definitely a couple of learnings here because I had, you know, I'd spent a lot of time down in the US too as part of my career and worked with the charitable sector down there.
Right.
And some of the learnings were just how differently organized things are in Canada. For
Mm,
example, I met with Food Banks of Canada, and they were talking about to me about how food banks are organized here, or less organized than in the US, where it's very much a hierarchical system.
right.
And so there's a certain amount of independence, I think, in the charitable sector here that was surprising to me, and less sort of coalition building or ecosystem building. Um, that was one key learning I would say I had in surprise. And then I think the other thing is just how much opportunity there still is, right? I mean, you see
Mm,
that in the data that we've shown year on year is there's still a lot of opportunity out there to get more Canadians participating in the charitable sector, whether it's through giving or through volunteers more actively working in the sector. And there's a lot of opportunity for the charities themselves to do more social good. There's a tremendous amount of need out there. So I really see that as just so much headroom that we have to go to really build a thriving sector here.
right. Let's pick up on that a little bit because I totally agree. I think there's a ton of potential and opportunity. Um, you know, Canada is one of the most generous countries, in the world. You've known this for some time. There's lots of data that show that the Canadians give fairly regularly and in a variety of different ways. But when you sort of look out to the next sort of 5-ish years, what are some of the behavioral changes that you might sort of see? And what are you starting to see that sort of maybe at the edges today that could become more mainstream, just in terms of behaviors around giving? I'm really curious to see if there are a few things that you're already noticing these are sort of the edge behaviors today, but could become mainstream in some way in the next sort of 5 to 7 years.
Yeah, so let me just touch on a couple of points there. First, absolutely, Canada is a very generous country and Canadians are very generous. But what we've seen in the data is that has declined over time. If you look at the tax filing data of the number of Canadians filing a tax claim for charitable giving, that has been a long 30-year decline. It used to be about 30% 30 years ago, and it's down to about 18% now. So that is one data point. It's not that the Canadians aren't giving in other ways, or Canadians aren't giving and not claiming it on their taxes, but that is a steady data point that we've had over a number of years. And what we're seeing is, because of the economic conditions, especially over the last couple of years, fewer Canadians are able to give, but those who are able to give are giving more, so they're stepping up. So again, going back to that inherent generosity in Canadians, those who can do more. And I think that's really great. But going back to your original question, there is going to be some shifts coming, right? We're on the precipice of a massive generational wealth transfer from the boomers to the millennials that is going to shift some of the available income to a different generation to handle that giving. And we have, a lot of new Canadians, new people coming into the country who are bringing in their cultures and their belief systems and their way of thinking about philanthropy and giving into it. And so a combination of those things really makes you think about how charities need to engage with Canadians as donors and think about what they need to provide. So what we know from the data is, and you've seen this, I'm sure, the younger generation of donors is much more keenly focused in on impact and measures of impact and seeing results. Right. I always say, if it were, grandma or grandpa's money, they might want that name on the building, right? They want that pride. That the younger generation wants to see the data. How many people are you feeding? How much good are you actually doing? I don't care about where my name shows up. So that's a big difference. And then the way you engage with that audience is different now. They're increasingly digital, right? They're digital natives. They've been born with the internet. And so thinking about how you use digital capabilities and digital channels to expose them to the good that you're doing and to really engage them in their generosity.
Right. There's a bunch of things to want to sort of pick up on here. One is the sort of the data around tax claims and sort of, the decline that you're talking about. And I really wonder though, Duke, is that a good marker for us? And and the reason I say that is because I was in Halifax over the weekend visiting my family, and we were taking a stroll down the harborfront area in Halifax, and there's lots of different types of activities and stalls and so on. And then we noticed a few folks who were raising money for charity, for tackling hunger in the city, and it was they had signs up that said, "Listen, we'll do push-ups for hunger." It was like, and it's $1 a push-up, right? So and you had the little tip tap sort of thing there, and you tap to donate, and you tell them, listen, like, I donated $10, and so it's 10 push-ups, right? So there's no charitable receipt there. Like it's a and you talk to folks like Tip Tap, and what they're saying is that, listen, like, the number of folks who actually ask for receipts is sort of minuscule. So how do you reconcile with that trend?
Yeah, so there absolutely, there's any number of ways Canadians can express their generosity. It's not always through a monetary donation where they're looking for a tax receipt. So you're absolutely right. There's all sorts of other activities out there that are doing fundraising. What we point to, though, is that is sort of a consistent data point that we can look at over time, and it has been on decline. And then you look at the flip side of that, which is in talking to charities and serving the charities themselves, how are their donation levels in that same corresponding amount of time? And what we know is many charities are reporting that their donation levels have not returned to pre-pandemic levels. Volunteerism hasn't returned to pre-pandemic levels. Right. And so all those other markers of people engaging with charities are other indicators. I don't think there's a single data point that you can point to use specifically, right? The other thing I would say is you're absolutely right. There's things like Tip Tap, there's the checkout donations, there's the buying goods, and some of it will go to social good and whatnot. And so the other concern I have is sometimes, even in your normal daily life, which you just described, are Canadians getting ask fatigue, right? Mm-hmm. Are they getting asked so many times in their life? Right. You're going up to the grocery store, and there's, the cadets are out there raising money for their thing, and then you walk into the store and there's something you can buy that has a charitable cause to it attached to it. Right. Then you go to the checkout and you can round up at the checkout, and then you walk out and the store might be doing a food drive and whatnot, right? So there's a little bit of that going on right now too, I feel like.
And is that do you think is that an episodic thing, or do you feel that's sort of how folks are feeling now, and that fatigue is gonna go away, or is this fatigue a prolonged fatigue, do you feel?
I think at some point it's about charities experimenting on different ways they can engage with donors and
Hmm.
engage with Canadians, right? And some may work out better than others over time. There's nothing wrong with any of it, I would say. From a everyday Canadian perspective, as a donor, you may at some point say, "Look, I only have this budget to give, and these are the ways I'm going to give it. I'm going to be more planful in my giving,
Right.
rather than in the moment." I could see that happening over time for sure.
Right. Want to pick up on something else that you said around newcomers and the sort of the rise of and it's Canada, I think, just surpassed 40 million
That's right.
population, so very, very exciting. But then there's the other side to that coin, which is, and yes, we can, engage, newcomers and refugees and all that. I think that's great. Then the other side of that coin is Canadians abroad. I mean, you yourself, lived abroad for a number of years,
Yes.
and it doesn't. I have too, and it doesn't quite feel like Canadians abroad are engaged in the charitable sector in the country by way of their giving. And so one of the really interesting, speaking of opportunities, one of the really interesting opportunities potentially is, what does it look like to engage Canadians abroad in a variety of causes? How do you see that playing into this opportunity space?
Yeah, I haven't spent a lot of time thinking about it, but let's just kind of workshop it a little bit here, right? If I think the first thing with Canadians abroad, having lived abroad, is are they still engaged in their Canadianism, right?
Right.
Right? Or have they, have if you see a lot of Canadians, particularly celebrities who move out of Canada, and they're fully engaged, and particularly in the US, in the American culture and the American society, right? And so the first trick is, how do you remind them that they're still Canadian, and they have sort of pride in being Canadian?
Right.
That would be number one for me. And then number two is thinking about the fact that for most people, giving is a very personal and local experience. I think the data all proves that out, right? People give to things that they see around them. And so Canadians abroad, are they are they seeing the things that are needed in Canada? Are they seeing the opportunities to do social good in Canada, right? And so
Right.
exposing them to that, because they may not be in their everyday life, right? They see what's around them.
Right. Um, and those are really interesting opportunities, I think, for charities and not just like, yes, from a disaster donations perspective. I think that stuff sort of shows up when there's wildfires in Alberta, or those kinds of things. Uh, but there are also other more consistent ways to give and causes to engage in. So uh, you mentioned digital, and this is really, really interesting because I sort of think about the future of fundraising a lot. And I remember in the late 1990s, there a few folks said, this is when when the internet was still the baby internet, right? And so but folks said, and as you know very well, CanadaHelps sort of kind of started in and around that time. Um, but a lot of folks said that, listen, online fundraisers are going to be the thing, and in-person
Mhm.
fundraisers would become obsolete. But decades have gone by, and it hasn't really been the case, really, right? And even post-pandemic, there are invitations for all kinds of in-person fundraisers. So it hasn't quite become obsolete. What do you make of that? And because there are folks who say, listen, digital is the trend, and everything's going digital now, but there still seems to be something that is of high value from an experiential perspective with in-person fundraisers.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're certainly, everything took a pause during the pandemic. But we're seeing a huge surge now in events again, and charities
Right.
running events, and that's great. There's nothing wrong with that. I think there is something about being able to engage and personally know your donors that's really valuable. To be able to have them see the good that you're doing and talk about that, I think that's extremely valuable. And people like those things. And right now, post pandemic, people are craving those things, right? Everybody talks about revenge travel, right? After the pandemic and people taking these luxury trips because they haven't been able to go on vacation for so long.
Right.
I think there's a craving for social interaction that
Mm.
since we've been locked up for so long, that charitable events just slot beautifully into in the moment right now, right? Digital is a way to augment what you do as a charity and to increase your fundraising footprint, right? It isn't necessarily a direct replacement for other things that you were doing in the past, right? Those things are still very effective, still drive a lot of activity and engagement. So there's nothing wrong with that. But digital allows you to have broader reach, right? To
Right.
a broader donor base that you may not be able to get into your events, to have more consistent contact and engagement with them through digital channels, and to really communicate with them more effectively, right? So it's not an either or scenario.
Right. And do you think digital is effective at building relationships with donors?
I think it can be. I think charities still have a lot to learn about
Right.
digital
Right.
and how to effectively use it. This is not something most charity leaders I know, wake up every day thinking about and obsessing about, right? They want to go out there and do their social good. They want to go feed more people, house more people, fight for social justice.
Right.
To do that, they need the revenue from fundraising, but that is not what gets them excited to get out of bed in the morning. And that's okay, right? That's okay. But there is a skills gap there, to be able to use digital more effectively to do their fundraising. And I think that's something that's important to do over time, because as I said, that next generation of donors that is coming in is digital. They're digital natives, and they're going to expect you to be digital. Even if they do come to your in-person golf tournament, they're expecting you to be on the social media channels. They're expecting you to be able to accept a credit card donation, right? Those are just meets min expectations.
Right. Let's talk about the digital skills gap for just a second here, because this is something that Canada Helps has been part of the a major voice in this space for some time. At Future of Good, we've hosted the Dismantling Digital Barriers Summit, and we have a digital transformation and technology reporter who covers this space. But from your perspective, what are a few major digital skills gaps that you see?
Yeah, it's a pretty major gap, right? So in 2021, we conducted a digital skills gap survey
Mm.
as part of our work. And what we found is that 1 in 3 charities believe they'll soon find it harder to continue their work if they don't improve their digital skills. Right? And this
Oh,
is particularly true for small charities.
right.
The charities who have less than $100,000 in revenue a year, they have no blueprint or plan even on
Mm.
how they're going to integrate digital into their everyday activities. And so that is concerning, right? They know they need to do it,
Right.
but it's sort of like staring at the ocean. You just don't know where to start
Mm.
at that point in time. And so part of what we've been trying to do with our work is give charities that blueprint, give them that guidance on, okay, here are some of the basic fundamentals you need to worry about. Last year, in conjunction with MasterCard ChangeWorks, we launched a program called the Charity Growth Academy, which really we took a set of pilot charities through it last year as a pilot program to say, let us workshop this with you. Let us help you understand where you are in your digital journey, where you want to get to, and then build out a roadmap for you to work on. We can't do it all in the confines of one, working session.
Right.
But let us do that for you. And so we had a very successful pilot. And then this year, what we're doing is taking that framework, turning it digital, and saying we're going to make it available online for more charities to use that assessment tool to help them on that digital transformation journey.
Right. You mentioned some of the reports that CanadaHelps has done. One of the major reports that you folks do every year is the Giving Report, and
Yes.
I want to mention one pretty significant stat from the 2023 Giving Report. In about 22% of Canadians expect to use charitable services to meet basic needs.
Yes.
How does that number make you feel?
It was quite stunning when we got the data back, actually. It's a little bit breathtaking, right? If you think about almost a quarter of Canadians are reporting that they're going to need to have access to charities for food, shelter, clothing, the real basics. This is not
Right.
spiritual growth or other things. This is like the fundamental essentials. And so that concerned us, but it was one data point. So what we actually did was we felt compelled and we needed to find out where that was going. So we actually in the spring, in April, conducted a follow-on poll just to see where that data was going. And concerningly, that number is going up. So that number in the latest report says it's up to 26%. So just in the span of 6 months, really, between those two data points, it's gone up 4%. Right. And so that's really concerning to say, okay, there are our fellow Canadians out there who are really hurting right now and really needing of charitable services at a time where charities are seeing just phenomenal demand right now, outpacing their revenues. And that is a huge stretch, right? So if you think about charities reporting, 57% of charities in the report are saying their demand for their services is outpacing their ability to deliver right now.
Right.
At the same time, we've seen the fundraising piece of it, go down a little bit or stay stagnant. That creates a big gap for them operational, right? And we know this gap is going to hit in some of the most vulnerable communities. We're seeing this gap hit with parents. 3 in 10 parents are saying they're being hit especially hard and needing a bit of charitable services for the basics. We know it hits younger Canadians more.
Right.
It hits women slightly more than men. Like this is concerning data for us.
Right. Maybe I'll ask I want to pick up on this and talk a bit about demand, but perhaps a provocative question in and around demand, because lots of folks have been talking about the resilience of community organizations, of charities, and it's extraordinary, no question about it, but it's never been sustainable, right? And as you said, the demand for services is increasing, and about 60% of charities can't meet the demand. Everyone says it's a funding gap issue, which it partly is, but it's more systemic than that, is it not?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think food banks are the classic example, right? They were started in the 70s as a stopgap measure, and here we are 50 years later, right? We haven't solved that challenge yet. If I've talked to a lot of leaders at different food banks, and they all say, "Look, Duke, I love what I do every day. I hate that I have to do it."
Hmm.
Right. And that sticks with me, right? There's a lot of charities out there who would love nothing more than to work themselves out of a job and to say, we've solved it. The need has gone away. We can all go off and do something else. Right. But that is not the case yet. Right. So you have to have this balance, I think, between what I call sort of the never ending now and the sweet dreams of the future. Right. The never ending now is, I've got people lined up outside. How do I go serve them? Because if I don't, they go hungry. Versus the sweet dreams of the future. How do I solve the root of the problem? Right? How do I create a society where this doesn't have to happen anymore? But you can't sacrifice the now. Like, those people need to be served right now.
Right. And let's talk about that from a kind of that never ending now versus root causes, because I'm really curious about how this shows up within CanadaHelps, because one of the tensions that CanadaHelps has to navigate is systems change, because yes, Canadians can keep donating to charities, no question about that. I think that can still happen. We can still do all kinds of promotions and campaigns and all that. Um, you know, whether we're talking, shelters or addictions or hunger, like, but unless there's a change in policy, unless there's a root cause change, as an example, charities will keep carrying the burden of basic needs, as you say, right? So, like, internally within your organization and as a team, how do you reconcile this need for systems change with your mission?
Well, I, I would say two things, right? First, Canada Helps is here to serve all charities in Canada, like all 86,000. Right? We treat them all equally. They all have access to the same set of services that we provide. Within that group of charities, there are some working on the Never Ending Now and some working on larger systems changes, and we try to support them both. If you look at some of the things that we've done, for example, around the cause funds, which we launched during the pandemic, some
Right.
of those cause funds are very specifically targeting on groups of charities that are, for example, focusing on climate change policy,
Right.
groups of charities that are focusing on land and food justice, right? And we have specific funds around them to say, yes, those are systemic level changes and change organizations that we want to try to support and have Canadian support and educating Canadians about those things. So yes, they both have to happen, and we try to support both of them. And the other thing is being able to collaborate with other organizations across the sector on advocacy and being able to lend our voice and lend our data that we produce to that discussion.
Right.
Those are two important things that we try to do.
Right. I want to shift gears a little bit here and pick up on something that you said earlier around fintech. You've worked in fintech for many years. As you've watched the industry, grow, and it's been explosive growth. As you know, there's
Sure.
all kinds of really exciting technologies and companies. But from a technology perspective, what are some of the things that can help the fundraising and the giving world? Like, I'm really curious to hear your take on, okay, you've been watching the technology, the fintech landscape for some time, and there's some really interesting work happening, in the credit side of things and the loan side of things, other sort of spaces. But when you see all these technologies, across the landscape, what's really inspiring, that's happening in the for-profit fintech world that you would find, wow, like this could be really interesting in the charitable sector.
Yeah, lots going on for sure in technology these days, right? So first, I'd like to say that I've been in fintech since before it was called fintech. Would have been helpful. Would have been helpful earlier on in my career if somebody had coined that term. It would have been easier to explain to my parents what I did for a living.
Right.
But yeah, it's seen an explosion of growth over the last decade in the focus on applying different emerging technologies to the financial world. Obviously, the darling of the technology world right now is AI, and in particular, generative AI. Right. Everybody's talking about ChatGPT and these other platforms, Jasper and whatnot, as really a means of enhancing human productivity. Right. And I think that is powerful to charities potentially that are resource strapped and personnel strapped. If you think about how I could use human augmentation of productivity through AI, right? Can I have AI help me write the marketing copy on my fundraising campaign? If you look at what Furniture Bank, for example, is doing in using generative AI in the images that they're using in their marketing to be more equitable, right? There's all sorts of applications, I think, to using generative AI within the charitable world to enhance productivity. I would say that's a key trend. I think the second one that's sort of interesting, that's an intersection of pure fintech into the charitable world, is robo-advising. This is a little bit of a different twist. So robo-advising, basically using, in the for-profit fintech world, using AI technologies to build investment portfolios for clients on a personalized level for wealth management, right? So I'm going to, based on your investment desires and characteristics in your timeline, create a portfolio for you using AI, right? That's the basics of robo-advising. I think if you think about that in thinking about how that could be applied to the charitable sector, well, is there a version of that that says, okay, now I understand all your philanthropic desires, the causes that you want to support, the funds that you want to contribute over time to that and commit over time to that, and say, okay, now I'm going to build you a customized philanthropy plan. That could be really intriguing, right? All these other, you talked about payments. Yes, there's a ton going on in the payments world and continues to be around different payment methods, the emergence of different electronic payments. I think those are, again, going to be meets min expectations of the charitable world as those things become more broadly accepted, right? I think, one of the quotes I love from a customer experience perspective is, your customer's last best experience anywhere is their minimum expectations everywhere. And so if you think about donors are consumers too. So anything that they see in their consumer lives, they expect to be able to see when they're a donor too. That started off with, okay, I want to be able to give through a credit card, and CanadaHelps was there to say, okay, we're going to do that for Canadian charities. Then it came to crypto, and we said, okay, we're going to do that for Canadian charities. You want to give crypto? Great, we're going to do that for you too. You want to give securities? We're going to do that for you too. You want to use your different wallets? Great, we're going to do that for you too, right? Like, that is an ever-evolving landscape of expectations that the charitable sector needs to keep up with its donors.
Right. Super. We're gonna wrap up in just a bit here, but I want to wrap up with your dreams for CanadaHelps. Over the years, there's been big leaps that the organization's taken. You mentioned a number of them. CanadaHelps sort of got into things like crypto before anyone else, considered it. And CanadaHelps has done. You mentioned cause funds. There's disaster funding. A whole host of other things. So, tell us, what are your dreams for CanadaHelps?
Yeah, so I think it's really a tie into everything that we've just been talking about, right? We've talked about this digital skills gap that charities have. We talked about this idea of being able to be more productive with the limited resources that you have. And so if you think about CanadaHelps in our founding and where we've existed for the charitable sector, we've really been a core part of the digital infrastructure for charities, largely focused in on online fundraising. But if you look at the digital skills gap across the landscape, it's more than just that. So I think as we move forward as CanadaHelps, as a digital infrastructure for the sector, we need to be doing more there. We really need to say to the charitable leaders, look, you don't wake up every day thinking about digital, right? Nor should you. You really should be out there feeding people. And what we should be there for you as CanadaHelps is as your digital partner, right? To handle the digital things for you, to handle all those capabilities and help you use your data, help you use analytics, help you use things like AI so that you can focus in on social good, right? And I want CanadaHelps to be that digital operating system for charities so that they come to one place to say, I've got all my digital things handled for me so that I can go off and do the thing that I do best, which is my programs, right? And when I say that in the purest of context of, like, I don't want to be a page one app that you're scrolling through endlessly every day, right? I want you as a charitable leader to come to CanadaHelps, do what you need to get done, and then go off and do your thing.
Right. That is quite a dream, Duke. I love it. Digital operating system for charities. It's been absolutely wonderful to spend the last hour or so with you, and we've got into so many different things. Loved hearing about your own journey, your learning curve, how you see the charitable sector landscape in the country. Some of the really, the intricacies of and the vulnerabilities that the charities, have right now and would continue to have. And loved the sort of the conversation around emerging technologies and what you see could have potential in the charitable sector. So thank you so much for joining us, and would love to do this again with you.
Absolutely. I loved our conversation as always. Thank you for having me.